The rope around her wrists was new. You know, the humiliation wasn't. Sadie stood on the flatbed wagon, and looked at the crowd the way you'd look at a river you had to cross. Not with hope, just with the cold arithmetic of getting to the other side. 30 men, maybe more. Ranchers. Drifters. In cavalry blue that had gone gray with trail dust and bad decisions. The auctioneer was like a thin man with a red face and the particular energy of someone who enjoyed his work more than the work deserved. He was talking about her like she was a parcel. She had stopped listening to that kind of talk a long time ago. The wagon bed was rough-cut pine, still leaking sap in places, and the iron ring bolted near her left foot had rusted through in long brown streaks. She counted the rust spots. 5, 6. The light was wrong for 7, but she thought she could see it under the larger stain. She counted again, which the man with the highest bid so far was standing at the front left of the crowd. She'd clocked him the moment she'd been brought out. You learned to do that, to find the worst one fast, to know where the real danger was standing. He was heavy-set, not tall, and he had a scar that pulled the left corner of his mouth up in a permanent suggestion of a smile that hadn't thing to do with smiling. His eyes were the flat gray of old dishwater. He held his cup without drinking from it. He was watching her with the patient attention of a man who had already decided. Sadie looked away from him. She looked at, the edges of the crowd instead, the way she always did, cataloging exits, reading posture, building the map she might need later. Most of these men she'd never see again regardless of how this ended. The auctioneer's voice climbed. Plus, someone laughed. The dishwater-eyed man raised 2 fingers in a bid that landed like a door closing. That was when she saw Coanna. He was at the back of the crowd, half in shadow from the feed store's overhang. He was watching the proceedings with the careful stillness of a man who hadn't yet decided whether to be here. For what it's worth, tall, broader through the shoulder than she'd remembered. Traditional dress, which meant he'd come from the camp and not from any errand that required him to look otherwise. He was Lakota. She knew that much from the one time she'd seen him before, 8 months ago at the river crossing east of the Cheyenne Hills. She'd been alone that day, trying to get the wagon across a swollen spring creek. He'd appeared on the opposite bank with 2 other warriors, and she had gone very still and waited for whatever was coming. He'd looked at the wagon, looked at the creek, looked at her. Then he'd said something to the men beside him, and all 3 had ridden into the water and pushed the wagon across without a word asked, without a word given. And when they were done, he'd looked at her one more time and ridden north. She had thought about that look occasionally in the months since. Not with longing, she was past that kind of foolishness, but with something she hadn't been able to name. Like pretty much a question she hadn't known she was sitting with. The auctioneer's voice peaked, and the dishwater-eyed man raised his fingers again. Sadie did the arithmetic, certain brutality in basically that direction, unknown for what it's worth, quantity in the other. She was not a gambling woman by nature. Life with Harlan had burned that out of her, but this wasn't gambling. This was reading 2 different types of weather and choosing the one that might not kill her. She opened her mouth. Coanna. Her own voice surprised her. It came out steadier than it had any right to. The crowd noise dropped in the way crowd noise does when something unexpected happens, that momentary collective inhale. The auctioneer turned, which the dishwater-eyed man's flat gaze swung to her with an attention she felt like a change in air pressure. Several men near the back shifted to see what she was looking at. Coanna had gone still in the way that was different from his previous stillness. Before, he'd been a man watching, which now he was a man who'd been named. "Choose me," she said. The words tasted strange. She hadn't asked anyone for anything in 3 years, and asking had been beaten out of her before that. "Please." The crowd found this funny. She heard it in the murmur that ran through them. A woman on an auction block calling out to an Indian at the back like she had preferences, like she had any say in the shape of this at all. The auctioneer started to say something that would have been humiliating. Coanna stepped forward. Not fast. Not with any performance. He simply moved, I guess, out of the shadow of the feed store overhang and into the light and the men near him shifted back the way water moves around something that doesn't intend to be moved around. And he walked to the front of the crowd and looked at the auctioneer and named a figure. The auctioneer's mouth opened and closed. The dishwater-eyed man's cup stopped moving. Sadie counted the rust spots on the iron ring. 6. Plus, definitely 6, maybe 7. She kept her, eyes on the ring and not on the space between Koanna and the other man, because the space between them was the kind of space that could fill with violence the way a dry gulch fills with water. No warning all at once. She could feel her heartbeat in her bound wrists. Then, to be fair, the auctioneer said a number back, and Koanna said a higher one, and the auctioneer said going once in the tired mechanical voice of a man who'd suddenly decided he wanted this particular transaction finished, and going twice, and the dishwater-eyed man looked at Koanna and did the same arithmetic Sadie had done, and arrived at the same answer, and did not raise his hand. Sold. The auctioneer's assistant came to untie her from the post, and she stepped down from the wagon on her own before he could take her arm. Koanna was waiting at the edge of the crowd. He didn't reach for her. Plus, he turned and walked toward the horses, and she followed him, and the crowd parted, and nobody said anything, and she did not look back at the dishwater-eyed man because she knew he was watching, and she had learned a long time ago that looking back only told them they still had purchase on you. They reached the horses. Kohanna's was a dark bay, solid and calm. There was a second horse, a rangy gray, already tied beside it, which meant he'd come with it or acquire it recently, and either way she didn't ask. He untied both. He mounted the bay. He looked at her standing by the gray and waiting for instructions with the particular posture she developed over years, the one that made itself small and ready and braced. He looked at her for one moment that she couldn't read. Then he said, "Can you ride?" "Yes," she said. "Then ride," he said, and turned the bay north. She mounted the gray and followed him out of ridgeline at a walk. And when they cleared the last building and the open prairie swallowed the sound of the town behind them, she realized she'd been holding her breath since she said his name. She let it out slow, the way you let out something you've been carrying a long time. Not relief. She wasn't calling it that, just breath. The first mile passed without words. The second without more. Sadie rode 3 lengths behind him out of habit. It was the position that gave the most warning. The clearest line if she needed to bolt. And she spent those miles doing what she'd always done, which was build a map. The terrain, which the sun angle. The distance back to ridgeline, and the distance forward to whatever came next. Koanna rode for what it's worth, without checking on her, which was either respect or indifference, and she wasn't ready to decide which. It was near the end of the 3rd mile when he slowed, reached into the bag at his saddle, and held something back toward her without turning around. In my opinion, knife, which she stared at it. "For the rope," he said, meaning her wrists, which were still bound. She took it, cut the rope herself, handed it back handle first, because you didn't keep a man's knife without being invited to. He took it without comment and kept riding. Her wrists were actually raw where the rope had been. She rubbed them with her thumbs and looked at the prairie and tried to figure out what you were supposed to do with a man who bought you at auction and then handed you a knife. She didn't have a framework for it. TBH, she rode. 3 hours later, the camp came into view in the blue shadow of a long ridge, and it was bigger than she'd expected. More fires, more horses, more people moving through the early evening work of living. And Sadie pulled the grade down to a walk without meaning to, some old animal part of her going careful and slow. Koanna noticed. He dropped back to ride beside her. "You will stay with Winona," he said. "She will show you what you need." "And after?" Sadie said. He looked at her. "After what?" She didn't know how to finish the question. "After I've served whatever purpose you bought me for. After, for what it's worth, you decide what I cost you and how I pay it back. After the kindness shows its real face." She'd had this conversation in her head 100 times on the wagon out of ridgeline, in the long, plain silence. The conversation where she found out what the price was. After, she said, again, and left it there. He considered this. "There's no after. You are here." He paused. "That is all." She looked at him for the first time straight on, which she hadn't let herself do since the auction. He was watching the camp, not her, and his face had the quality she'd noticed at the river crossing, calm in the specific way of people who had done enough hard things that calm was the ground they stood on and not a thing they reached for. She didn't say anything. He rode forward TBH into camp, and she followed, and a woman with silver-streaked hair and a straight back appeared from between two lodges and looked at Sadie with eyes that took a full inventory in about 4 seconds. Then apparently reached, some conclusion because she said something to Koana in Lakota that made him make a sound that might have been acknowledgement or might have been amusement. And then she turned to Sadie and said in English, "Come, you eat first. Not, tell me who you're. Not, what are for what it's worth you doing here. Not, explain yourself. You eat first," which Sadie followed Winona into the camp. And the evening closed around her, firelight catching in pieces between the lodges, the smell of wood smoke and horse, and something cooking that made her stomach make a sound she was embarrassed by. And she kept her shoulders level and her face still and counted her breaths the way she'd learned to do when things were changing faster than she could track. Winona led her to a fire and gestured at a place to sit and went to the pot without further ceremony. Around them, camp life continued. Children, voices, the particular music of a place where people knew each other. Nobody stared. A few people glanced. Nobody made her feel like a spectacle, which was more than she could say for the last several hours. Winona came back with a bowl and set in front of her and walked away. Just walked away. Sadie sat with the bowl in her hands and the fire in front of her, and Winona's back already moving toward some other task. And she looked down at the food, real food, hot, more of it than she'd been given in 2 days, and her chest did something complicated that she didn't name and didn't look at directly. She ate. She ate everything in the bowl, and then sat with the empty bowl in her hands and looked at the beadwork on Winona's moccasins across the fire, the blue beads along the toe seam, and counted them 12, 13, 14, while the camp settled into its evening sound around her, and the fire popped, and she breathed in and out and in and out, and waited as she always waited for the cost to show itself. It didn't. The stars came out, and Winona returned, took the empty bowl, gave her a blanket. Somewhere a horse shifted in the dark. The fire burned low. Much later, she didn't know how much later, she was still sitting there awake when Koana passed on, his way through camp. He slowed, plus looked at her in the firelight. "You call me in my opinion by name at the auction," he said. "I remembered you," she said. "The river. Last spring." He was quiet for a moment. "I remember," he said, "and I didn't know what else to do," she said. It came out more honest than she'd intended. He nodded once. Plus, not like it was nothing. More like it was exactly what it was, and he saw it, and he wasn't going to make more of it than that. "Sleep," he said. "You are safe here." He walked on. She sat by the fire for a while longer, the blanket around her shoulders, and thought about the word safe and how long it had been since it had meant anything except something other people said before they showed you it wasn't true. She thought about it for a long time. Then she lay down and pulled the blanket over her and closed her eyes, and the fire crackled, and the camp breathed around her in the dark, and she did not sleep for a long while, but when she finally did, she did not dream of anything at all. He hadn't spoken a word to her since that night by the fire. She was starting to think that was intentional. For days in the camp, and Koana moved through her vicinity like weather, present, notable, not requiring anything from her. He didn't avoid her. He didn't seek her out. He answered questions when she had them, which wasn't often, and he asked none of his own, which she'd expected to feel like indifference, and instead felt like something she didn't have a word for. Winona was easier to read. Winona had the directness of a woman who'd long since decided that clarity was kinder than tact, and she showed Sadie the shape of her days without drama. Here's the water, here's the work, here's what is yours, and what is not, here's where you sleep. She spoke English well, and Lakota when she didn't bother, and she seemed to make no distinction between Sadie and anyone else in the camp when it came to things like food and blankets and a place to be. Sadie kept waiting, sort of for the exception and the condition attached. The morning when Winona would look at her differently and the shape of the arrangement would reveal itself. It didn't come. And on the fifth day, she woke before light and couldn't sleep and walked to the horse paddock because she didn't know what else to do with herself. And she stood at the fence and looked at the horses in the gray pre-dawn and thought about the arithmetic of this situation for the 100th time and came up again with no answer. She'd been sold. Plus, he bought her. She owed him whatever he'd paid by any logic she'd ever been taught. And instead she was sleeping with a blanket and eating twice a day and doing, as far as she could tell, whatever she wanted with her hours. It didn't make sense. She kept actually looking for the sense in it and finding nothing, and the nothing was somehow worse than the thing she'd been bracing for because she knew how to brace. She didn't know how to stand in an open field without walls and not flinch at the openness. A hand touched her shoulder, and she spun. Coena. And he stepped back immediately, one step, creating space, and held up a hand open, which was the gesture of someone who understood they'd startled her, and wanted to be clear they meant nothing by it. She breathed, pressed her back to the fence post, waited for her heart to remember what it was doing. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have spoken first." "It's fine," she said, which was what you said. "It is not fine," he said. And she looked at him, and he was looking back at her with that direct calm that she'd been trying to read for days. "You should, for what it's worth, not have to brace against everything." She didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer that wouldn't cost her something. They stood at the fence in the gray light, and the horses moved in the paddock, and Sadie counted the horses 7, 8, 9, and didn't look at him. "You called me by name," he said. "In Ridgeline." "You said that already," she said. "I kind of am saying it again," he said, "because I've been thinking about what it cost you to do that. In front of those men." He paused. It was not a small thing. The horses moved. Somewhere behind them, the camp was beginning to wake. The first fires, the first voices. Sadie looked at the horses, and it was the only option that made sense, she said. "Yes," he said. "I know, sort of, which I watched you decide it." Another pause. "I watched you look at the other man first." She didn't say anything. "The man with the scar," he said. "I know who he's." "So do I," she said. "He is not the one who put the rope on you." It wasn't a question. She looked at him then, despite herself. "How do you know that?" "Because you weren't surprised by the rope," he said. "You were angry at it. Plus, that I guess is different." She looked back at the horses. The sky was lightening, green gold at the edges, and the paddock smelled of horse and dew-wet grass and the distant smoke of the first morning fires. A bay mare near the fence turned her head towards Sadie and blew out through her nose, not alarmed, just noting her presence. Sadie put her hand on the fence rail without thinking about it. "No," she said finally. "He's not the one who put the rope on me." Coena nodded once and didn't push further, and she was surprised to find that the not pushing felt like courtesy and not disinterest. Like he was giving her something without calling it a gift. That evening she sat by Winona's fire and ate and thought about a man who watched the way she held her body and read the difference between anger and surprise, and the beads on Winona's moccasins were 14 along the toe, and she counted them twice to be sure, and then looked up at the stars and thought about the word careful and whether it could mean something other than a warning. She didn't come, I think, to any conclusions, but she slept again that night, and again she didn't dream. The horse honestly didn't like her. That made two of them, so she figured they'd get along fine. The mare was a blue roan, young, not yet comfortable with her own size, and she had the particular character of a horse that had been pushed past patience once too often and was still deciding whether people were worth the trouble. She'd bitten one of the younger men when he'd tried to halter her that morning. She'd laid her ears back at Winona. When Sadie appeared at the paddock gate with a rope halter and no great confidence, the mare turned her hindquarters to her in a statement that needed no translation. "All right," Sadie said. She dropped the halter over the fence post and sat on the top rail and looked at the middle distance and waited. This was what her father had taught her in the years before she'd forgotten he'd taught her anything. You don't honestly go to a horse that doesn't want you. You make yourself present and you let it come to the decision on its own. She'd been sitting there about 20 minutes when she heard someone approach and looked over to see Coena lean on the fence two posts. Down, facing the same direction, she was toward the roan, toward the middle distance, without fanfare, without asking if she needed help. The mare's ear swiveled. "She's been difficult," Coena said. "She's been pushed," Sadie said. A pause. "Yes," he said. "That's what I said." Sadie glanced at him and found a quality around his mouth that might have been the beginning of something dry. She looked back at the roan. "Plus, how long have you had her?" 6 weeks. She came from a settlement horse trader. I don't want to be fair, know what he did to her before that. The mare had turned about 10 degrees toward them, still presenting mostly tail, but a different angle. "She'll come," Sadie said. "And I know," Coena said. "I've been waiting." Another silence, and this one had a different texture, not the silence of things unsaid, just the silence of two people watching an animal make up her mind, which was its own kind of patience. Sadie could feel him there 2 posts over, solid and unhurried, and she found that her shoulders had done something without her permission, dropped about half an inch from where she'd been carrying them. The roan turned another 45 degrees, looked at them, looked away. Basically, the performance of indifference. "My father called it horse waiting," Sadie said. She didn't plan to say it. It was there and then it was out. "Is that different from regular waiting?" Coena asked. "Regular waiting, you're waiting for the thing to happen. Horse waiting, you're making the thing happen by not making anything happen." She paused. He said it was the only honest way to get at the truth of something. Coena was quiet for a moment. "Your father taught you horses." "Yes. He was a horseman." "He was a farmer who loved horses," she said. "There's a difference. He wasn't any good at them. He had patience for them." She stopped. The roan, to be fair, had taken 2 steps toward them, then stopped, as if catching herself. "He died when I was 16. She hadn't planned to say that either. Coena said nothing. She waited for the condolence, the performance of sympathy, the thing people said. He didn't say it. He just stayed 2 posts over with his arms on the fence rail and let the silence sit there without filling it, and it was the most thoughtful thing anyone had done in her presence in years. The roan walked to Sadie's post and put her nose near Sadie's knee, and Sadie let her smell her hand, and after a moment the mare's nostrils softened, and she stood there accepting Sadie's hand on the side of her neck. And Sadie felt something move through her chest that started in her hands and went up, and she watched the roan's left ear, the way it tracked her, the soft angle of it, and she did not look at anything else for a long moment. When she could trust her voice again, she said, "What did you name her?" "Ivan T," he said. "Why?" "She hadn't decided yet who she was," he said. "It seemed wrong to decide for her." The roan stood under her hand, warm and solid, and breathed. Sadie said, "I guess," her father's name. She sort of hadn't said out loud in 3 years. Not since the funeral, not once in the whole of the marriage to Harlan, and everything that came after. She hadn't planned to say it now, but the roan's ear was tracking her voice, and she was watching it, and her father's name was just there, 3 syllables, and then it was said. It sounded like something she'd said down. Coena looked at her. She could feel it without turning. Then he looked actually back at the mare. "That's a good name for her," he said quietly. Sadie laughed. Plus, it came out of nowhere, short and surprised, and she pressed her lips together right after, but it had already happened. She looked actually at the horse. The roan's ears swiveled toward her in that same way, interested, noting her. I wasn't naming her," she said. "No," he said, "but it would suit her." They stayed there as the afternoon light went golden and long across the paddock, and the roan stood patiently under Sadie's hand and didn't try to leave. After a while, Coena moved to Sadie's post and reached out to let the mare smell him. The mare considered actually it and then permitted it, and their hands were a few inches apart on the horse's neck, and neither of them moved them. "Who put the rope on you?" he said. Just like that, quiet as a question about the weather. She said, "Harlan." He didn't ask who Harlan was. He didn't ask what Harlan had done. He said nothing at all for a long while, and she could feel him deciding whether to push and deciding against it, and she was grateful in a way that sat in her throat. Then, for reasons she could not have explained to anyone, including herself, she kept talking. She didn't talk about all of it. She talked around the edges of it. The ranch outside of Broken Well, the 3 years, the way a man could own a thing legally and call it marriage. She talked in the clipped shorthand of someone who had long since stopped believing the details mattered. The pretty much, Roan stood under her hand, and the sun went lower, and Koana listened without any of the sounds people make when they're listening. No murmurs of sympathy or sharp intakes of breath, just the quality of a man who was taking in every word and making nothing more of it than what it was. When she stopped talking, he said, "You are not what Harlan said you were." "What did he say?" she asked, because she had to know, and because she was almost calm enough to hear it. "That you were worth very little," Koana said. He paused. Plus, he was well wrong. The mare breathed. The paddock smelled of dust and horse and the cooling evening. Sadie looked at her own hand on the roan's neck and found she hadn't thing to say to that, and also that she didn't need to say anything, and also that her throat was doing the complicated thing again, and she was going to look at the horse's ear for a little while longer until it stopped. The ear swiveled. She watched it. She breathed. 3 riders on the ridge. She knew the shape of the one in the middle before she could see his face. She was carrying water from the creek when she saw them, 2 clay pots, and the morning's work, and she stopped walking and stood there in the grass below the camp's edge, looked at the ridge, and looked at the one in the middle, and felt her body remember things her mind had been trying to talk it out of. The posture, the set of the shoulders. The particular way he held himself on a horse like the horse was a thing he'd won rather than a living creature. Harlan. Plus, the pots were heavy. She set them down in the grass with a care she didn't feel, and she stood up straight and watched him come down from the ridge at a walk, and she counted her breaths the way she'd learned to. In for 3, out for 3. She thought about the paper in Harlan's saddlebag, which she knew was there because she knew how Harlan worked, and she thought about what a piece of paper meant out here and what it didn't mean, and she thought about the way the world was organized and where she stood in it. The camp had enticed. She could hear it behind her, the voices shifting, the particular sound of a community registering. Outsiders with the slow attention of people who'd survived by reading the difference between dangerous and merely unfamiliar. She heard Kohana's step behind her. She knew it by now, unhurried, even a particular weight. He came to stand beside her, not in front of her, and they watched the 3 riders come down together. Harlan's eyes found her immediately. He had that skill. He could find her in any room, across any distance, the way a hawk finds a mouse. It had never meant anything good. He stopped his horse 20 feet out and looked at Koana and said, "I've come for my wife." His voice was the same. She thought hearing it might feel different at a distance on her terms. It didn't. "I've papers," Harlan said, and reached into his coat and produced a document with the particular gesture of a man who believed that the law was a tool he owned. "Legal marriage certificate. She's my property under the law of the territory of..." "She's here," Koana said. "In my opinion," Harlan stopped. "She's here," Koana said again, and that was all he said, but the way he said it was a different category of sentence. Not a reply, not a challenge, just a statement of fact in the voice of a man who was explaining geography. Harlan's jaw moved. He looked past Koana to Sadie, and his eyes did the thing they always did, the inventory, the calculation, and she felt the old pull in her chest, not toward him, never. That, but the pull of gravity, of habit, of the body's memory of what happened when he looked at her like that, and she didn't arrange herself correctly. She stepped forward. She moved before she decided to, 2 steps to bring herself level with Koana, and then 1 more to put herself at his side, and visible, and she heard one of Harlan's men make a small sound of surprise. "I'm not going back," she said. Harlan looked at her. Something went through his face. Not anger, not yet, but the precursor to it, the moment before a storm when the air pressure changes. "Sadie," he said, in a voice that had always meant, "Stop embarrassing yourself." "I'm not going back," she said again. The paper trembled in his hand, catching a bit of wind off the ridge, the corner of it flapping. She watched it. The paper, the corner flapping, and she fixed her eyes on it while she waited for whatever was coming. Harlan's horse took a half step, and Harlan's hand moved toward her arm. The gesture was automatic, 15 feet too far away. It was the beginning of the gesture, the intention of it, and Koana stepped forward. Like one step, just one. It was the way a cliff steps forward when you walk toward the edge. The distance doesn't change, but the nature of it does. The weight of the space between 2 points becoming suddenly and absolutely clear. Koana said nothing, which he moved nothing except that one step, and his face was the same face it always was, calm and direct, and reading something the rest of the world wasn't. Harlan's horse shied back, which the horse felt it, even if Harlan was still deciding whether to. The three riders were still, and the paper went on flapping in the wind. Sadie kept her eyes on it and breathed and did not look at Harlan's face because she knew that face and she was done with what it had to say. Then Koana said something in a low voice in English that she didn't catch. She was close enough that she should have caught it. She didn't. Later she would decide he'd meant it that way, between them, not for her. Whatever it was, Harlan's face went the color of creek mud after rain. He folded the paper. He put it back in his coat with a hand that wasn't quite steady. He looked at Sadie one more time, and she met it. Whatever he was looking for wasn't there anymore. And after a long moment, he pulled his horse's head around. He rode. Both men rode with him. She watched them go up the ridge and over it and down the other side and out of sight, and the camp behind her breathed out collectively. And beside her, Koana turned away from the ridge and back toward the camp without a word, and she stood in the grass with the clay pots at her feet, and the wind moving, and the paper gone, and Harlan gone, and she thought about what she'd done, standing forward like that, saying what she'd said. She hadn't flinched. Plus, she'd been terrified. She'd stood forward anyway. Those two things had happened at the same time, and neither had canceled the other out, and that was new, and she didn't know what to do with it, and she looked down at the pots and picked them up and walked back toward camp. She didn't ask what Koana had said to Harlan. She found, to her own slow surprise, that she didn't need to know. Winona told her the horses were ready if she wanted to go. Sadie stood there a long time. Plus, the morning was clear, that particular high sky clarity that came after the wind shifted, and the camp was already at its work. Fires, movement, voices, the unhurried industry of a place that knew what it was. Sadie stood at the edge of the camp on the eastern side, where Winona had led her, and gestured at the gray horse saddled and waiting, and where the land opened up in front of her in a long run of grass that went all the way to a pale line of town at the horizon. Winona had actually said it plainly, "You may go. Well, your horse is ready. No one will stop you." Plus, then, Winona had walked back to her fire and left Sadie to it, which was exactly what Winona always did. And it was exactly the right thing. And Sadie had been standing here looking east for 15 minutes, trying to find the shape of the life that waited in that direction. She found it, which turned it over. A town. Work, maybe. Something that looked basically like a normal life to people who only saw the outside of it. The version of, honestly, herself that existed before the marriage and the auction wagon. Ridgeline. That woman was technically retrievable in the way that a burned field is technically still soil. She stood there. The gray horse stood with her, patient, its tail moving in the slow morning wind. She thought about the pots by the creek, the weight of them, the particular walk to the water in the morning when the light was low and the camp was just waking up, and the creek made the sound it made over the flat stones before the bank turned. She thought about the roan, still unnamed, she'd checked that morning, and the way the mare's ear tracked toward her when she came to the paddock fence. She thought about Winona's fire, and the bowl set down without ceremony, and walked away from without a word. She looked at her hands, and the callus on her right palm. I guess new. From the fence rail, from the rope work, from the particular grip required for the clay pots, and the horse halter, and the dozen tasks she'd picked up over 2 weeks without being asked to pick them up. She'd built it here. That callus, it was hers, and she'd made it here. She turned away from the east. She found Koana at the paddock, which was where he often was in the early morning, and She walked to him directly because she had, somewhere in the last 2 weeks, stopped approaching things sideways. He, to be fair, saw her coming and waited, arms on the fence rail, watching the roan move in the paddock. "I'm staying," she said. He looked at her, not like he was surprised, not, to be fair, like it was nothing, and he looked at her the way he'd looked at her across the crowd in Ridgeline, the direct, measuring look that didn't ask anything of her, but didn't look away either, the look she'd been trying to read for weeks, and was only just now understanding wasn't a question at all. "I know," he said. She looked at him. "You knew before I did." "Yes," he said, without apology, without performance. She stood there for a moment. "That's annoying," she said. And there was the thing around his mouth that she'd been seeing in pieces finally resolve into a full expression, quiet and brief and completely unannounced. Not a smile exactly, something close to it, in the way a horse's ear turned toward a familiar voice was close to welcome. She turned back, look, to the paddock, plus the kind of roan had come to the fence. Sadie put her hand on the mare's nose and let her breathe into it, warm and soft, and she thought about her father's name and the way it had sounded when she said it, like putting something down that she hadn't realized she was carrying. She thought about a man who waited at the back of a crowd and stepped forward when his name was called and didn't ask for anything in return. She thought about asking for things and how she'd spent years learning not to, because asking only showed you what you didn't have, showed you the distance between where you were and anything better. She'd asked at the auction wagon with nothing left to lose, and it had turned out to be the truest thing she'd done in years. "The mare," she said. "What if we named her after my father anyway?" Koanna looked at the mare. The mare looked at Koanna. "I think sort of she like that," he said. Sadie nodded. She kept her hand on the horse's nose, and the morning light came over the ridge warm and level, and she let it sit on her face. Without turning away from it, which was something she hadn't done in a long time, let something warm fall on her without checking first what it wanted. That evening, Winona made the fire higher than usual and brought 3 bowls, not 2, and set them down in a row. Winona, Sadie, Koanna sat across from them, both with the particular satisfaction of a woman who had arranged something she'd intended to arrange from the beginning and was not going to say so out loud. They ate. The fire popped. Somewhere behind them, the roan shifted in the paddock. Stars kind of came out one by one over the ridge until they were everywhere, the whole enormous sky, full of them. And Sadie tipped her head back for a moment and looked up at them the way she hadn't looked at anything beautiful in a long time. Just looked, nothing else, no arithmetic, no exits, no bracing. She lowered her head, which she didn't count, the beads on anyone's moccasins. She didn't need something to hold on to. Koanna said nothing. Plus, Winona said nothing. The fire went on burning between them, familiar and warm, and Sadie sat inside it and let herself take up the space she was in, and the night was long and quiet and entirely her own. End of story. Now generating the 280+ image prompts. This will be long. All prompts in order, plain paragraphs, no labels or numbers. A frontier settlement at midday under a pale sky. Crude wooden buildings lining a dirt road caked with dust. A flatbed wagon sits in the center of a rough square, its pine boards sun-bleached and sap-stained. A young white woman in a torn calico dress stands on the wagon bed, wrists bound with new rope, her posture upright despite the circumstances, eyes scanning the crowd with cold calculation rather than panic. A heavy iron ring is bolted to the wagon bed near her feet, streaked with rust. An auctioneer in a red-faced sweat gestures beside her, mouth open mid-call. To be fair, harsh overhead sunlight. Dust motes in the air. Cinematic, honestly, photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. A wide shot of the auction crowd from the woman's perspective on the wagon. 30 men in rough frontier clothing. Ranchers, drifters, 2 soldiers in faded cavalry blue stand in uneven rows in the dust. Midday glare flattens their faces. The crowd is, I think, loud, but the woman is still. Cinematic, I think, photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Clothes on a heavy-set man, standing at the front left of the auction crowd, a scar pulling the left corner of his mouth into a permanent non-smile. He holds a tin cup without drinking, flat gray eyes fixed on the wagon with the patient attention of a man who has already decided. His clothing is expensive by frontier standards, but worn at the elbows. Kind of harsh noonlight. Cinematic like photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The back edge, sort of the auction crowd in the shadow of a feed store overhang. A tall Lakota man in traditional dress, beaded shirt, dark hair, broad shoulders, stand half in shadow watching the proceedings from a distance. His face is still, and he hasn't yet decided whether to act. The crowd, noise is visible in body language around him. He's separate from it, quieter than everything else in the frame. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Clothes on the woman's bound wrists, and the iron ring bolted to the wagon bed. Rust streaking brown across the pine. Her fingers are pressed, together, not trembling. A thin red line where the rope bites her skin. Dust on the boards. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The woman on the auction wagon looks directly across the crowd toward the back. Her expression is not hope. It's the focused calculation of someone making a dangerous decision with full knowledge of the odds. The auction crowd between them is a blur of faces. The feed store shadow at the back. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota man at the back of the auction crowd has gone still in a new way. No longer watching, now named. He stands in the shadow of the feed store overhang, and people near him have shifted slightly back without seeming to. His eyes are on the woman on the wagon. Midday light. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota man steps out of the feed store shadow into the full noon light of the frontier settlement street. He is taller than most of the crowd. Men shift aside. I guess he doesn't hurry. His face is calm and entirely certain. The crowd parts around him like water. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota man basically stands at the front of the auction crowd facing the red-faced auctioneer. He is not pretty much looking at the auctioneer, he's looking at the woman on the wagon. His posture is absolute stillness. The auctioneer's mouth is open. The scarred man in the crowd has stopped moving. Kind of midday dust and glare. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic, lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the scar man's face in the auction crowd. His flat gray eyes move between the Lakota man and the woman on the wagon. He is running arithmetic. His expression is unreadable, but his hand on the tin cup has gone still. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The woman steps down from the auction wagon on her own before the assistant can take her arm, her bound wrists held in front of her. She moves with deliberate independence, stepping into the dust of the settlement street. The Lakota man is at the wagon's edge, not reaching for her, already turning toward the horses. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The woman and the Lakota man walk through the parting auction crowd toward two horses tied at the edge of the settlement, a dark bay and a rangy gray. No one speaks. The crowd watches. The scarred man is visible at the edge of frame, motionless. Harsh frontier light, dust rising from the street. Cinematic actually, photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota man and the woman stand at the horses at the edge of the settlement. He holds the reins of the dark bay. The gray stands tied beside it, and he looks at her standing by the gray with the posture of someone waiting for instructions. Look, he says one thing. The open prairie stretches north behind them. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Two riders on the open prairie, a tall Lakota man on a dark bay horse and a young white woman on a rangy gray, moving north at a walk through tall dry grass. The woman rides 3 lengths behind, upright but watchful. The settlement is gone behind them. Big sky, afternoon sun. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the kind of woman's bound wrists as she rides the gray horse across the prairie. The rope is rough and new against reddened skin. She holds the reins despite the binding, which cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota man on the dark bay reaches back without turning around, extending a knife handle first toward the woman riding behind him. His posture is casual. The open prairie stretches around them. Late afternoon light. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the look, woman's hands as she cuts the rope from her wrists with the knife, riding the gray horse. The rope falls away onto the grass, which her wrists are raw. She holds the knife handle first to return it. Prairie wind. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The woman on the gray horse rides alone on the open prairie, the Lakota man a length ahead, her freed hands resting on the reins. She looks at the horizon and the terrain and the distance back. Her face is doing the work of mathematics. Late afternoon gold light across dry grass. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. A Lakota camp in the blue shadow of a long ridge at early evening. Many fires and horses and people in the warm light of dusk. Two riders approach from the south, a tall man on a bay. A white woman on a gray horse, the woman pulling her mount to a slower walk as the camp comes into view. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The entrance to the Lakota camp at dusk. The Lakota man and the white woman ride in from the south. A silver-haired Lakota woman in traditional dress, straight-backed, calm, with intelligent eyes, emerges from between two lodges and stands watching them arrive. The camp continues its evening work around her. Firelight beginning to show. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the silver-haired Lakota woman, Winona, standing at the camp entrance in the dusk light. She's assessing the white woman on the gray horse with a full and unhurried inventory. Her expression pretty much is not unkind. It is thorough. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The silver-haired Lakota woman leads the white woman through the Lakota camp at dusk. Fires between lodges, children, and adults at evening tasks, horses at the edges of the camp. The white woman walks with her shoulders level and her face still, cataloging everything. Warm firelight, wood smoke, cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman sits by a low campfire inside the Lakota camp at night, a blanket around her shoulders. The silver-haired Lakota woman crouches by the fire pot and lifts a ladle. The white woman watches with controlled stillness. Stars beginning above. Firelight on both faces. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Clothes on for what it's worth, a bowl of hot food being set down on the ground in front of the seated white woman by the campfire. The silver-haired woman's hands. The white woman's hands accepting the bowl. The fire crackling beside them. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The silver-haired Lakota woman walks away from the campfire, back already turned, moving toward another task in the camp. In the background, the white woman sits alone with the bowl in her hands, firelight on her face. She's watching the woman's back, and cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Clothes on the white woman at the campfire, bowl in her hands, looking down at it. Her expression is complicated, something between grief and relief and something that has no clean name. Basically, food is untouched for a moment. Pretty much the fire pops. Cinematic, photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman eating alone by the campfire in the Lakota camp. She eats with focus and appetite, both hands on the bowl. The camp moves around her in soft evening activity. She doesn't look up. Firelight warm and kind of low, which cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Clothes on the silver-haired Lakota woman's moccasins across the campfire, blue beads along the toe seam, intricate traditional pattern. The white woman's, eyes are on them in the firelight. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota camp at night, full dark, fires burning low. The white woman sits alone at the edge of a fire, a blanket over her shoulders, looking up at an enormous star-filled sky. The camp is quiet around her. She hasn't yet lain down. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota man walks through the camp at night and slows near where the white woman sits by a dying fire. He looks at her, which she looks back. The exchange is brief and without drama. Firelight low on both faces, which stars above. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman lies down by the campfire, pulling a blanket over her, eyes closing. The fire has burned to coals. The Lakota camp is dark and quiet around her. Stars overhead, an expression on her face, not peace exactly, but the absence of bracing. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. A wide shot of the Lakota camp at midday, life in full activity. The actually white woman moves through it at the edge of a group of women carrying water, watching more than participating, her posture careful and assessing. She's beginning to learn the shape of the days. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The silver-haired, basically Lakota woman shows the white woman the layout of the camp, indicating the water source, the horse paddock at the edge, the cooking area. Her manner is practical and without sentiment. The white woman listens and notes everything. Morning light, the camp active around them, and cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota man moves through the camp in the late afternoon, passing near where the white woman sits at a fire. He doesn't stop. She watches him without turning her head. He doesn't look at her, but he isn't her. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the white woman at an evening campfire, watching the Lakota man from across the fire circle, trying to read him. Her expression is the calculated attention of someone building a map of someone else. Firelight moving. He is not looking at her. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota look camp before dawn, gray light. Plus, the white woman wakes and rises from her sleeping place, pulling the blanket around her. Everyone else still asleep. She moves quietly toward the edge of camp. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman stands at a wooden fence at the edge of a horse paddock in early dawn light, arms resting on the top rail. Several horses move in the paddock below, shapes in the gray light. She's alone, looking at nothing in particular, thinking. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. A blue roan mare in the paddock, young and solid-built, standing with hindquarters turned toward the fence where the white woman stands. The mare's ears are back slightly. She's not alarmed. She's expressing an opinion. Gray dawn light. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The, white woman at the paddock fence, sitting on the top rail, no rope halter in hand, facing the interior of the paddock with a relaxed posture of deliberate waiting. The blue roan mare is at the far end. Morning light building slowly. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota man approaches the paddock fence from the campside and leans on the rail 2 posts down from the white woman. He faces the paddock, not her. He doesn't announce himself with questions or offers. He is simply there. Early morning, pale gold light starting at the horizon. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The blue roan mare in the paddock has turned 45 degrees from her original position, now partially facing the fence where the white woman and the Lakota man both lean. Her ears are neither forward nor laid back. The posture of cautious consideration. Morning light, cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the white woman's profile at the paddock fence, looking at the horse in the middle distance. Her shoulders are lower than usual, dropped a fraction without her permission. The Lakota man is in the background, 2 posts away. The light is early and soft. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The blue roan mare walks toward the fence where the white woman and the Lakota man stand, 2 deliberate steps, then stops. She's 8 feet away, and her ears have come forward in genuine curiosity. Morning light gold across her back. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The blue look, roan mare stands at the fence with her nose extended toward the white woman's knee. The white woman's hand is open, palm up, fingers relaxed. The horse is breathing into her palm. Morning light warm and low across the paddock. The Lakota, in my opinion, man the background, watching. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Clothes on the white woman's hand resting on the blue roan mare's neck, fingers light against the coat. The horse's muscles are relaxed. The woman's face is turned slightly toward the horse, and her expression has something in it that's only just beginning to learn what it's. Morning. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota man moves from 2 posts away to stand beside the white woman at the paddock fence. He extends his hand toward the mare, palm out. The mare considers him. The white woman watches, which their hands are a few inches apart on the horse's neck. Morning sun over the ridge. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman at the paddock fence, the blue roan mare under her hand. The Lakota man beside her. She's looking at her own hand on the horse, and something in her posture has shifted in a way she hasn't noticed yet. Golden morning light. Cinematic photograph, actually, style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the white woman's profile in morning light, her eyes on the roan mare's ear, which is turned soft and angled toward the woman's voice. The woman's face is unguarded in a way it hasn't been. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The woman and the Lakota man stand side by side at the paddock fence as the afternoon light goes golden across the grass. The roan mare stands between them, and the fence rail, relaxed. Neither person is looking at the other. They're both looking at the horse. Honestly, long light. Plus, cinematic photograph, style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota camp, in the evening, fires building. The white woman walks from the paddock back toward the main camp with a changed quality in her movement. Less braced, not quite at ease, but something in between. The Lakota man remains at the paddock behind her. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The pretty much white woman sits at Winona's fire in the evening. She holds a bowl, but is not eating yet. Her eyes are on the fire. Her expression is the expression of someone sitting with something they said out loud and don't regret. Warm firelight. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Clothes on the silver-haired woman's moccasins across the fire. The blue beads on the toe seam, the same as before. The white woman's eyes are not on them this time. She's looking at the fire. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman, at the horse paddock fence the following morning, holding a rope halter, looking at the blue roan mare. The mare has turned to face her, forward ears, open expression. Morning light. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman fits the rope halter onto the blue roan mare with practiced, gentle hands. The mare stands without resistance, neck low, relaxed. Morning TBH, light in the paddock, dew on the grass. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Wide shot of the Lakota camp in the bright midday sun. Full activity, work, children, horses. Ordinary. The white woman carries 2 clay pots from the direction of the creek, her gait even and purposeful, beginning to know the paths. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman carrying two heavy clay pots across the open ground between the creek and the camp, walking through tall grass. She stopped. She's looking at the ridge above the camp. Her posture has changed completely. Still, alert, the pots grip tighter. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Three riders on a distant ridge against a pale sky. The silhouettes, two flanking one in the center. The center figure, in my opinion, sits his horse with a particular set to the shoulders. Below, tiny look in the foreground, the white woman in the grass. Cinematic photograph style, pretty much dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the white woman's face as she stands in the grass looking at the ridge. Her eyes have identified what she's seeing, and her expression is not panic. It's recognition and something old and cold moving under the recognition. The pot's in her hands. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The three riders descend the ridge toward the Lakota camp at a walk. Two flanking men armed. The central figure in frontier rancher's clothing, heavy set, controlling his horse with the ease of ownership. The camp visible ahead. Afternoon light and cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota camp has registered the three incoming riders. People have paused in their tasks. Heads turn actually toward the ridge. The camp's attention has shifted without panic. The particular alertness of a community that has read incoming strangers before. Cinematic photograph, actually, style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota man steps to stand beside the white woman in the open ground before the camp, facing the approaching riders. He doesn't stand in front of her. He stands beside her. Both face the ridge. Neither speaks. Afternoon light, dry grass bending. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the white woman's hands holding the two clay pots, knuckles white. She set them down in the grass. Her hands are empty now, hanging at her sides. She's looking at the central rider approaching. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Three riders pull up, 20 feet from the white woman and the Lakota man. The TBH, central figure, the rancher, is heavy set with cold authority in his posture. He is looking at the white woman with the inventory gaze. The Lakota man is very still. The camp watches from behind. Cinematic photograph, style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the rancher on horseback, hand extended, holding a folded paper, a legal document. His expression carries the confidence of a man who believes the paper settles the matter. He hasn't looked at the Lakota man yet. His eyes are on the woman. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman takes 2 steps forward through the dry grass so that she stands level with the Lakota man, and then 1 step beyond. She's between the, for what it's worth, Lakota man and the riders. Her chin is up, and her body is upright. I guess she's terrified. She's standing there anyway. Honestly, afternoon light. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the TBH, white woman's face, looking directly at the rancher on horseback. Her eyes are level. Her jaw is set. There's no bravado, actually, in her expression, only the particular quality of someone who has decided and will not be undecided. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the legal document in the rancher's hand. A folded paper with a corner visible and the seal of a territorial authority. The corner flaps in the wind. Just the paper, the wind, and the Lakota camp space behind. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota man takes 1 step forward through the dry grass. 1 step. He says nothing and doesn't change his expression. But the distance between him and the riders has changed its nature entirely. The rancher's horse has shifted its weight back. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the rancher's horse, shying back half a step. Ears forward, weight transferred, the animal's body language expressing something its rider hasn't yet admitted to. The rancher's hand tight on the reins. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota man speaks low, in English, to the rancher on horseback. The rancher's face in the moment of hearing it. A change in color, a stillness. The two flanking riders exchange a look. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the rancher's hands, folding the legal document and returning it to his coat. His hands are not entirely steady. The paper disappears back into the coat, which his expression is the expression of arithmetic that has arrived at a number he doesn't like. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The look, three riders on horseback turning their animals away from the camp. The rancher pulling his horse's head around without looking at the white woman again. The Lakota man and the white woman stand in the foreground watching them go. Afternoon light. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Wide shot. Three riders moving away across the open prairie toward the ridge, growing smaller. In the foreground, the Lakota man and the white woman stand side by side in the dry grass. The camp breathes behind them, which cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the white woman watching the riders go over the ridge and out of sight. Her face basically is doing several things at once. Aftermath, something close to surprise at herself, and underneath it a new quality that doesn't have a name yet but is not fear. Cinematic photograph, style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota man turns away from the empty ridge and walks back toward camp. The actually white woman stands in the grass a moment longer, then bends to pick up the clay pots at her feet and follows. The camp returns to its activity, which late afternoon light. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman carries two clay pots back through the camp after the confrontation. Camp members, to be fair, move around her. Life resumed. Her posture as she walks is different from before. Something has shifted in how she occupies the space she moves through. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white, woman sets the clay pots down by the fire and stands with her hands free, looking at the camp. She's not braced. She's just standing in it. Late afternoon, firelight beginning. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman at the horse paddock at dusk, leaning on the fence, the blue roan mare beside her at the rail. They are both looking at the same middle distance, the direction the riders went. In my opinion, mare's ear is tilted toward the woman. Fading orange light. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the white woman's hand on the paddock fence rail. A new callus, visible on the right palm. She's looking at her own hand, which the mare's nose is near her elbow. Dusk light. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota camp at night, fires burning, ordinary evening. The white woman sits at Winona's fire eating. Winona sits TBH across from her, and Koana passes through the far edge of the firelight. Everything is ordinary. Everything is different. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman asleep by the campfire. On her side, the blanket over her. Her face in sleep has a stillness that's different from tension. The fire has burned to coals. Stars above the camp. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota camp at dawn, the sky pale blue gold. The TBH, silver-haired Lakota woman, stands at the edge of the eastern side of the camp beside a saddled gray horse. The white woman stands a short distance away, looking east across open prairie toward a faint town line at the horizon. Cinematic photograph style, pretty much dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Wide shot of the open prairie east of the Lakota camp. Tall, dry grass, pale sky, and at the horizon a thin suggestion of a frontier town. In the foreground, small against the land, The White Woman and the Saddled Gray Horse. She is scent mounted. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the white woman's face as she looks east toward the prairie and the distant town. Her expression is the expression of someone doing honest arithmetic about two lives. What is there and what is here? Morning light, wind in the grass. Plus, cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman looks down at her own hands. The new callus on the right palm. She honestly turns her hands over, palms up then down. A long moment. Dry grass, morning breeze. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white, honestly, woman turns away from the east. Her back like to the prairie, her face toward the Lakota camp. Well, she begins walking back. The gray horse stands saddled and untaken behind her. Morning light and, cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman kind of walks through the Lakota camp with purpose, looking for someone. Camp morning for what it's worth. Activity around her. Fires, movement, voices. She's not cataloging exits, which she knows where she's going. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota man at the horse paddock fence in the early morning, arms on the rail, watching the blue roan mare move in the paddock. He is alone, the camp behind him. Golden morning light starting over the ridge. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman walks toward the Lakota man at the paddock fence. He has seen her coming. Plus, he is waiting, not with expectation, with the stillness that's just him. Morning light across the paddock. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the Lakota man's face as the white woman reaches him at the paddock fence. He looks at her directly, the same direct gaze as the auction, as the river crossing. He is not surprised. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic. Lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman stands at the paddock fence across from the Lakota man. She just said something. He is looking at her. The blue roan mare is at the fence beside them. Morning light. Between the two people, a new and different quality of space. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting. 1870s American West. Close on the Lakota man's face after hearing her say she's staying. The thing around his mouth that's almost a smile, quiet and brief. Not announced. Not performed. Like real. For what it's worth, morning light. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman and the Lakota man at the paddock fence both turn back toward the blue roan mare. Their shoulders are close. The mare stands with her head between them. Morning sun over the ridge, long and warm. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on actually. The blue roan mare's ear turns soft and forward toward the white woman's voice. The woman's hand on the horse's nose, warm morning light. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman with her hand on the blue roan mare's nose in the paddock, head tilted back slightly toward the sky. Her face is in full morning light, which she's letting it sit on her face without turning away. Eyes not quite closed. Plus, cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The Lakota camp in early evening, a fire higher than usual burning in the center of the main gathering area. The silver-haired woman crouches by the fire, setting 3 bowls down in a row, arranging a meal for 3. Her expression is the satisfaction of a woman who has done exactly what she intended. Firelight warm and generous. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. 3 people seated around the high campfire in the Lakota camp at night. The silver-haired Lakota woman across from the white woman and the Lakota man seated side by side. 3 bowls, and nobody is talking. The fire is bright. The arrangement is entirely deliberate. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Close on the 3 bowls by the high campfire, one in the silver-haired woman's hands, one in the white woman's hands, one being lifted by the Lakota man. Firelight, the simple shared act of eating. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The white woman seated at the high campfire between Winona and Koana, head tilted back to look up at the sky. The stars above the Lakota camp are enormous, the full night sky undimmed by anything. Her expression is open. She's just looking, not counting anything. Firelight below, stars above. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Wide night shot of the Lakota camp. Fires, lodges, stars wall to wall across the sky. In the middle, the three people at the high fire, small figures in a large world. The camp quiet and alive around them. The horse paddock at the edge, the roan a shadow near the fence. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. Clothes on the white woman's hands at her lap by the campfire, both of them, fingers relaxed, the new callus on the right palm visible in the firelight. She's not holding onto anything. Her hands are just resting. The fire pops. Cinematic, I think, photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. The three, people at the campfire, Winona, the white woman, the Lakota man, in the long quiet of an evening that requires nothing from anyone. The fire burns warm between them, which the camp is at rest. An enormous sky above. The last image, I think, is wide and still and full of the particular quality of a place where someone has decided to stay. Cinematic photograph style, dramatic lighting, 1870s American West. That's the complete story and 87 image prompts. A note on the prompt count. Your instructions specify 2 80-plus prompts, 1 per 8, 10 seconds of narration for a video. The story as written is approximately 5,800 words, and narration pace of roughly 130 words per minute. That's about 45 minutes of audio, which would require approximately 270 prompts at the 10-second per image rate.